cultural enrichment, because if you think of it, like with the language, we have a lot of cultural aspects, cultural issues that are going to come with it. So in a way, it's like opening a window to a different culture, a different way of saying things. Something like, those of you who are science teachers, something as simple as the difference in kilometers and miles, or pounds and kilos. Those things, or in temperature, the different types of degrees. Those things are going to come with the language, and we have to make sure that we incorporate them in the classroom, so that culture also appears here. But the most important thing is that teaching CLIL means that it's going to be a cognitive challenge, but not only for the teachers, which it is, but for the students. Okay, it's going to involve a lot of changes in the way you have to do things, so that that cognitive challenge doesn't go over the limit and becomes too much for the students. Okay, we can use CLIL methodology in English, definitely. Okay, because haven't you ever had a wonderful text for reading comprehension that really, how can I say this? It's really interesting, and it's about, I remember when I was teaching English, I had this text on the driest places on earth to teach the superlatives. So you can also incorporate that and include that, and try to coordinate a little bit with the content teacher, so you can do the same thing at the same time. Okay, we'll come to that in a second, don't worry. Okay, so as I was saying, we've got the 2 for the price of 1. Okay, we're going to be working with content, we're going to be working with language, but that also brings 2 different problems. Okay, we have students who normally in a native language class are going to have difficulties in following the lesson, because their cognitive skills are, different, not so advanced, they require more time, and they're going to find it difficult to follow the lesson. Okay, so that cognitive challenge for them is going to exist, whether we're doing it in one language or in another. And then we have to add, in this case, the problem of language, because some students may not have any cognitive problems, but their language skills are not fantastic. So they're also going to have problems to follow your lesson. So we have like 3 different scenarios. One in which we have students with cognitive difficulties. We have another scenario with students with language difficulties. And we have another scenario in which the subject teacher is not really skilled, is not confident, or if it doesn't feel safe with teaching that subject in another language. And again, we'll have to kind of adjust, and we'll have to maybe ask for help to the language teachers, right? Perhaps. Okay, so in any of these scenarios, what's key is to plan properly. Okay, and when we say plan properly, I mean exactly that. Outline the objectives. Okay, that's essential. If we have a clear idea where we're going and what students need to be learning, forget what we want to teach, or what the book says we have to teach, or what the Ministry of Education says we have to cover. Think of what is it that students need to know when we finish with this. Okay? That is the kind of objective I'm talking about. So if we have that clear, and we set that target, then we can really plan the content properly. And if we plan that content properly, we'll have to decide the order in which things are going to happen. We'll also need to check what linguistic adjustments need to be made, if any, and normally there will be. And this is when we come back to what you were asking before. We have to find cooperation between the language teacher and the subject teacher for many reasons. One of them is that, as I said, maybe the subject teacher is great at geography, but just got a C1 certificate, like their language of English is good for a speaker, for somebody who's producing a language, but is not really that much aware of what linguistic difficulties the students are going to have, because a teacher of English has studied that and knows what the problems are and where the adjustments need to be made. Okay, so this is when the cooperation begins. Like this week, before everything closed down, I teach social sciences in secondary, And my colleague Alex, who is doing English in the same years as I teach, went there with the book of English and said, okay, now we're going to be working on erosion, rivers, and all that. And she said, like, would you like me to work with maybe landforms? Okay, they had something about that in their English books. So we said, that's great, but maybe we can do that before or after. So we sat down and we talked about what I need and what she had to offer. And it was great. And I know that many of you don't have time to do that, or maybe your colleagues have never done that. So it's never too late to start. It's never a bad moment to start cooperating, because it's really going to make a difference. Okay. Now, learning. Okay, and here's when we start talking about scaffolding a little bit. If we understand that the learning process requires time, but it also requires a method. Okay, and I'm sure you'll know that there are loads of different theories and loads of different approaches to teaching, loads of different methodologies, and in the end, do any of them work? Well, all of them do, and all of them don't. So in a way, it's better if you're comfortable with the way you're teaching and you believe in the way you're doing things and you think you're doing them for a reason. Okay, for me, learning is like, I've got this here, this layer learning, but in a way it is, right? You learn something, and then when that is clear and that's done, you pile up. The next bit of layer of learning comes as the next layer. And so in the end, it all piles up and you can climb up and you can reach the cookie jar. So this layer learning needs that. You need the basics, and then when you have those basics, you learn something else that needs that basic knowledge to improve or to advance. I don't know if I'm making myself clear here. It's one of these, when you've got your concepts very clear in your mind, and sometimes it's like hard to get them through. But that's my attitude to learning. Like, you cannot advance if you don't know the basics. It's like learning to drive. Okay, if you're not confident, if you don't feel safe, then you're not going to take any risks. And if you don't take any risks, there are certain scenarios in which you're not going to be skilled in because you haven't tried them. So if we put all these things together, let's say we start learning how to, I don't know, what the gears are and how to use the indicators. And little by little, we start feeling safer and we move a bit faster. Students, I think, and again, it's my way of saying this, for students, it's basically the same thing. If they don't feel safe, they're never going to put their hand up. They're never going to take the risk of saying something. They're never going to try. They're never going to experiment. And it is by experimenting and by making mistakes and self-correcting yourself that you learn faster and you learn better. Okay, because you have, I don't know, you have, you don't hesitate, and you compare, you come to conclusions. Your learning is more practical and it becomes more creative. Okay, but to do that, as I said, you need to be going up on that pile, but you need to be safe. And how can we be safe? By scaffolding. Okay, scaffolding. How many times have you heard that word in your teaching years? I suppose many. But are you really familiar with the meaning of scaffolding? Like, it's like when you're building, and to go up, like you secure the step before you go to the next one. Okay, so in teaching is the same thing. You have to make sure that they're safe before you move to the next step. Okay, I think I'm going ahead of myself as usual, so let's go here for a second. Do you know these names? I suppose, have you seen them before? Have you heard about them before? Yeah, you have, of course. Yeah. Now, you know that there are all different approaches to learning, to teaching, but the question here is like, and I'm simplifying a little bit, that. Okay, I'm just going to the key point that I want to use to continue. But what do all these methodologies have in common? What did all these people say to make them deserve a place in my little diagram here? Any thoughts on that? Learner-centered, social learning. Okay, so you've done your studies. Very good. Exactly. They all use social learning, and it's like modeling in a way, right? Okay, so all these methodologies require modeling. They need support to maximize their learning, students. Okay, they imitate, they are supervised, they are guided, whichever way. But in the end, in the moment of learning, that learning has to be done independently. Okay, which means that that learning process requires support and requires somebody to be there to guide them and to model. But the learning itself happens when the student is ready and when everything is clear. So scaffolding is the key for that, okay, to make them move and to make them advance. And this is where we have Bloom's taxonomy appear in the scenario. Okay, I keep calling him Leopold Bloom, but of course it's Benjamin Bloom who came up with this taxonomy, this list of levels, and that it has been revised to adapt more to the new new moments. The taxonomy kind of makes categories of the different levels of cognition and classifies the ones that are more simple, let's say, or less difficult from a cognitive point of view, to the ones that are more advanced. And then we have that taxonomy that we're going to have a look at in a minute. And we're going to use it for outlining the objectives and for planning the activities. So we're going to see how we can apply that taxonomy to a practical level in our classrooms for both subject teachers, for math teachers, for English teachers, for every single teacher. Because cognitive levels are applied to the way we learn, and we learn anything, even driving. Okay, so let's move on. This is the pyramid. Okay, I'm sure you've seen it at some point. And the pyramid, like in this case, we've got colors, but what's important is the verbs, the words that we have in here. We can see how in the lowest, like the base of the pyramid is remember, because teachers, typical situation, you've got a student who goes to the book, goes through your notes, learns them by heart, repeats them literally in an exam, and you know that he doesn't know anything. He knows that he doesn't know anything, but everything's there because he's memorized it. So to remember something, to memorize something, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to do anything with it. You just simply learn it by heart. From a cognitive point of view, it is the lowest part in this pyramid, okay? Because you don't need to do anything with that information. You simply have to memorize it and use it. We're going to see this type of activities. We're going to see this as the easiest ones and the first ones that appear, because we're going to need these facts to be in the students' minds in order to do something else with that information. Okay. The second step, the second stage, is to understand something. Okay, here on the right, apart from having a little explanation, you've got verbs that can be used for designing activities that practice that level. So for example, for remember, we'd have memorize, repeat, define, okay, things that require simply that you have the information in your head and you repeat it. When we come to understand, we have to explain something, okay? We need to have a clear idea of what it is that we've got in our brains, what it means, so that we can repeat it. But we're not going to repeat it in the same way we have learned it, because we have already understood it. That means that that information is in our minds, and we can explain it, we can recognize something, we can classify into different categories, which is something you're going to be doing in a minute. And then when we have understood that, we can apply that knowledge, we can apply that information to something different. Okay, so we're starting to put that into practice. It's not a theory anymore. It's not information that we have in our brains anymore, but now we're going to do something with that. To do it, we need to have it all clear, right? So we're going to use the information in a new situation. Then we're going to analyze that information, which starts to be a bit more difficult. And think of some students that you may have in class. You see how some of them may start struggling at this point, okay? That they're okay with remembering things, they're okay to understand them, they can apply them in a different situation if it's not too far from what you have done before. But then now we have to start analyzing what it is and relating it to other things, comparing it to other situations, seeing what the differences are with others, testing if that would work in a different scenario. A little bit more complex from a cognitive point of view, don't you think? Moving up in the pyramid, we've got evaluate. Now, be careful with evaluate. Evaluate is not assess. Okay, here we're not talking about exams. We're not talking about tests. We're not talking about them giving us information. Evaluate is what you do with that information that you've got in our brain. So now with this situation we've got at the moment, I suppose some people have sat down with a lot of information, a lot of data on their desks and said, okay, now with this, we have to analyze the situation and we have to evaluate the impact of measure A or measure B on the population, okay? So this is a way you have to make a decision based on facts, based on data, based on information, but you need to assess whether that information you've got leads to in this direction or it goes in that direction or what it is. You have to weigh the pros and cons. You have to defend your choice in case you've already made one. You have to decide and say why you have decided that. Again, in a moment, like if we have to put it in the list, you see how that is much more complex from a cognitive point of view than just remembering a list of verbs. Okay. And the top of the pyramid, there we have the final part is to create. Quite often we see that people misunderstand what this create means. When we plan a project, for example, we normally think, okay, we have to create something to show the parents. We have to do something that is, I don't know, like maybe like a castle with sugar blocks, whatever. But you have to create something physical, tangible. No, that's not the case. When we talk about create, it's not making a product. It's simply using all that information that we have gathered, all that information that we have understood, we have applied, we have evaluated, all that that we have in our heads. We have to use it in a different way. Okay, so do we need to make something different? No, even an exam can be a proof of creation. Imagine that you have given somebody a list of verbs, they have understood, they have applied it, they have analyzed it, blah, 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 and now you have to give them, okay, now write a story using these words. Okay, they're going to create because the product that's going to come out from that activity is going to be something totally different to what you have given them before. Okay, so that creation is the most difficult activity, the most difficult aspect of the whole of the activities that we can plan, because it requires it's going to pose a big cognitive challenge for students to do it in a way that even if they use models, they have to do something original, okay, something different. So far, so good, right? Remember that you can always write something if you've got a question or a comment or something is not clear, right? I don't see your faces, sorry. Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy applied is basically this, okay? If you want to understand a concept, you need to remember it, okay? You need to have the information in your head. If you want to apply a concept, you need to have understood it before, because then if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't have a clear information, if your ideas are not crystal clear about it, then that application is not going to be, okay? So imagine I tell you now, everybody please, take your pencils and mix colors with them. It's like, sorry, what pencils, what colors, what are you talking about? You're going to do it because you don't know what I'm talking about. You haven't understood my instructions beforehand. That's a very simple example, but you know what I mean. Then, if you want to go to the next step, right? If you want to evaluate a process, if you want to evaluate, oh, sorry, that's a spelling mistake there, evaluate, right? Process, then you need to analyze it before. You need to have all the information in your hands. You need to have all the facts, all the data, all the concepts in your hands so that you can make a proper evaluation with it. And obviously, to create a suitable conclusion, to come to a proper creation, everything needs to be evaluated in depth. Okay, so you see how scaffolding is about that. We cannot ask them to do something if all the previous stages are not fixed, are not secured, and students is there like everything's going to collapse. And if it's going to collapse, what's that creation going to be like? Really, really simple. And they're not going to take any risks. They're not going to try. They're not going to go further because they don't feel safe, right? Now, I'm thinking mostly of secondary, okay? But if you work or if you want to use this Bloom taxonomy in lower years, like for infants or the early years in primary, it doesn't work exactly like this, okay? We divide the different levels in Bloom's taxonomy into lots and hots. Okay? The first levels are lots, and we talk about lower order thinking skills. And we say they're lower order thinking skills because from a cognitive point of view, they, like most people can do them, right? And when we talk about little children, they can also do them, okay? We're talking about these three levels. We're talking about remembering, we're talking about understanding, and we're talking about applying. So let's say that the requirements from like the brain has to do in this moment is work, but can be done. You know, it's like when we're talking about Montessori, Vygotsky, when we talk about Brunner, and they all have, remember this first moment in which there's a teacher guiding, or there's like the students are in their inner circles with, so it's that, okay? This first stage when they are let loose, but they're not that loose. There's guidance, and they can still refer to the previous stage for support. If you have to apply something, well, you have just understood it and you have it there in your head. So it's like very close to that remembering process. Okay. We will do activities to recall information, like what is the name of, or when did this happen, where can you find this, okay? To check understanding, where can you find this? Like, for example, this is what we have done. Now, where can you find it in a different place, right? And we're going to use them to review learning. So the questions are going to be very specific. They're going to be something that is in there, and they just have to go in their brains, go in their memories, get it, and take it out, okay? Whether it is to just say it, as in the first case, remembering, or to understand something, or simply to apply it. So if you think of the younger students, they can do any of these activities. They could do any, they could be okay in any of these levels. They would feel safe in any of these levels. If we continue to the next three stages, which are analyzing, evaluating, and creating, we're going to what we call the HOTS, the higher order thinking skills. And here we're going to have, well, some more difficulties. We have to find a way to get them to develop their reading skills, to develop creative thinking, to develop some critical thinking as well. If you're familiar with the process of inquiry, again, you know that there are stages, and there's one point in which you have to also draw conclusions. Okay? And very importantly, they need to be able to develop assessment skills, but they're not going to assess others, or maybe they are, but they're going to assess themselves as well. So you're going to be asking them to be using their brains in a different way. They have the information that you've given them, or they have acquired in different ways, but you're also going to have the need for them to use their cognitive skills. Okay? And this is when younger children or students with learning difficulties will have it more difficult and will need more support. And sometimes you can even, well, leave it there. Okay. Oh, hello from Serbia there. Hi. So more things. Type of questions. Why? Okay. Why? Why requires analysis? Why requires a deep understanding of something. They need to explain something. How can you explain this? How can you justify what you have done? So there has to be a process there. You see how it's different. Okay, so the lower order thinking skills are in one level, and once they're acquired and once they're clear, you can move on to the next bit. But you cannot ask somebody why if you haven't practiced enough. Do you understand it? Okay. Okay. So we're going to start here with some examples. Now here my screen is a little bit small. I hope you can read it properly. Okay. So I have adapted this from a very interesting book. So if any of you are interested, there you have reference. Okay. And here we have the different levels in Bloom's taxonomy with an example. Okay. So any science teachers here? Any physics? So very simple, very clear remembering activity. What are Newton's 3 laws of motion? Now, I can tell you 3 laws of motion, but I probably wouldn't have a clue what I'm saying. Yeah, I just learned them by heart, and I can tell them to you. End of the story. Any cognitive requirements? Well, not really, just memory. That's it. We're going to move up. Now we have to show that we have understood them. We have to describe the 3 laws of motion in your own words, which means I cannot have learned them by heart and repeat them. Now I have to change words. I have to start saying, okay, I know what I'm saying. Let me say it, let me put it in a different way, right? I have understood the motion laws. Now I'm going to apply them, okay? Oh, in a problem, simple. So we've got a project out here. We're going to calculate the kinetic energy. Okay, I have that in my brain. I understand how to use it. Here, I use it. Okay. We move out of lots, we start using HOTS. We're going to analyze the situation now. We're going to differentiate between potential and kinetic energy. Now, if I just remember the 3 laws of motion, would I be able to do that? Can we go from remembering to analyzing? No, because that doesn't mean that I have understood what I'm talking about. Okay, let's say that we're here. I've understood what I'm talking about. Can I jump there? Maybe I need that to be safer. Does it mean that I cannot do it? No, you can do it, but your students are not going to feel so safe. They're not going to feel so comfortable doing it because they haven't applied it. They haven't used it yet. So we're skipping a step. That is quite interesting for them because now that they're going to understand better. Okay, we're analyzing that. Let's move to the next step, evaluating. Determine whether using conservation energy. Okay, so we've got here a situation that is different, and we have to use our knowledge, use the information that we have already and our understanding of these laws of motion to evaluate to see if in this situation one is more appropriate than the other. Remember the why we just mentioned, okay? And why? What would make it more important? More appropriate, this one or that one? What? So you know what I mean. You have to have a clear idea. You have to have a very clear information set in your mind. You need to have it all there. You know that piles I told you before, that pile needs to settle before you can put on the next one. Think of this as a layer cake, okay? Until one is settled, you cannot put the next one, other one's going to mix. So this is the same here. And finally, creating. You've got it all clear. You understand it. You've analyzed it. You've evaluated it. Now you're going to design an original homework problem. Okay. You're going to create. You're going to use all that information you've got to do something different. Okay. And then, well, we can do something else with that. Okay. It's going to be part of an activity. But the task itself is design a problem. Okay. Design a problem. So you see that the stages, right? Yes, okay. Does it usually take more time to implement one lesson using this methodology? It seems so. Okay. Yes and no. Depends, because some people work, like if you're doing CLIL, pure CLIL session, you're going to be designing your own modules. So you're in control of the time. Okay. If you're using textbooks, then it's up to you to simply organize what you're going to do before what. And if between one thing and the other, you need to include something else. Do you assess every level of taxonomy? No. For assessment, let's say that what I do is I use two types of assessment. I use formative and summative assessment. So formative assessment is the typical classwork punctuation that you give them. So you're observing their progress, and that's what you assess. If the activities are well planned and well designed, it's going to really see, it's going to help you see where they are in their learning process. If they, like, now imagine that somebody struggles there, okay, then you know that if everybody else is already able to go on to the next levels and somebody still's there, then you have to be careful, because maybe that person requires further assistance or they need something different. Okay, so it really depends on what kind of teacher you are. For me, it doesn't take longer to prepare a lesson like this, because I have a very clear idea of what these levels are, and I apply them. When I plan the lesson, I say, okay, now I'm going to do this, that, and that. What goes first? Okay, and what goes first? Not from a content point of view, but I'm talking about the activities. Okay, what kind of activity? So I plan the content as it has to go. I have a look at the linguistic requirements that we need, and then it doesn't matter what it is. It's a type of question that I prepare. It's a type of activity that I prepare. Okay, I think maybe later we can continue with this. Okay, here I have given you some example activities, some example work that you could give students. I think maybe this will help with what we're saying. Put yourselves in the shoes of Robespierre and give a speech to persuade others to join the revolution. Now, would you say this belongs to the HOTS or to the LOTS, to the higher order thinking skills or to the lower order thinking skills? What would you say? Yeah, little hesitation there, right? Because you have to create something. Sorry, I've given you that. I was going to ask in the next slide, but anyway, I'll try to not give you the answers before I ask you the questions. Sorry. So you're going to put yourselves in the shoes of Robespierre, which means that you're going to need to have a very clear information, a very clear idea of who Robespierre was, what period of history, why he was given a speech, what revolution we're talking about. And once we have all that clear, and we really need to have it clear to be able to do it from the point of view of Robespierre, okay, to prepare that speech. So that requires a very, very complex, it is a very complex cognitive challenge. And if you just, because it's a very attractive activity to do, isn't it? If you're a history teacher, it's like, oh yeah, let's see what we get out of here. But if you haven't done your steps properly and you give this to students, you said they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Okay. And they may do it. Why not? But the result is going to be very poor. Yeah, and you're going to be disappointed. And they are going to feel like, okay, well, that wasn't interesting at all, because they're not ready for it. You need to really climb up until you can do that. Okay. I'm going to try and not say anything else. What about define photosynthesis? Hot or lot? Good. The next one, after reading the text, explain the concepts used by the author to support his ideas. Controversy there. Okay, I won't give you the answer so far. And in the next one, after reading the text, explaining your own words, the concept of rotation and revolution. Let's say, which one, let me put it this way. Considering this, after reading the text, explain the concepts used by the author is number one, or you can simply say concepts by the author. And the explaining your own words, the concept of rotation and revolution, which one would go first in the pyramid? Okay. The concepts used by the author or the concept of rotation and revolution, which one would you say needs to be done first? Go right in there. Author needs to go first. The concept of rotation needs to go first. Sure, I'll repeat the question. So if you were organizing these activities, what would you have to do first? Ask them to explain the concepts used by the author to support his ideas, or ask them to explain the concepts of rotation and revolution. Okay, yeah, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. Yes, they need to, like the concept of rotation and revolution would be lower order thinking skills, like you have understood that, now explain it in your own words. But explaining the concepts used by the author to support his ideas is far more complex because you need to analyze the text, you need to identify what the ideas of the author are, and then what in the text supports those ideas. Okay, so that's obviously going to be more complex from a cognitive point of view. And the concepts of rotation or revolution is something that you have learned, and you simply have to explain in your own words. Okay, so it's much more simple, cognitively speaking. Okay, what about the 5 steps of the scientific method? Lot or hot? Yeah. Remembering, so I said it again, sorry. I'm giving out a lot of information from the next questions I was going to ask you, but never mind. And then compare and contrast the reasons France and the UK had for entering the Second World War. What about that one? Hot or lot? Yes, it's hot. It's higher order. And using the formula studies, solve the following problem. This is a bit more complicated. Okay, I'm not saying anything yet. We're going to the next slide. Okay. And now let's match this with Bloom's levels. So the first one, I've already done that for you because, I was talking too much sometimes. So if you have to put yourselves in the shoes of Robespierre and you have to give a speech to persuade others to join the revolution, that is a clear creation activity, okay? Because as we just said, you need to have the facts, you need to understand what happened in those years, you need to be able to apply that information. You have analyzed and evaluated, and you are creating that speech. You have used all that you've done so far to create something different. Okay. Defining photosynthesis, I hate that word. Photosynthesis would be in which level? would actually remember or understand, as Lydia says. Remember, because you simply have to repeat that definition and understand. If you ask them maybe to use their own words, or you give them some other keywords to rephrase that definition, but basically it would stay here, okay, either in remember or understand max, okay. What about this one? They explain the concepts used by the author to support his ideas. We know that it's in the higher order thinking skills, okay. And Maria, you say, sorry, Lydia, you say analyze. Maria, you say evaluate. Okay, I wouldn't go to apply. No, it's further higher there, okay. It has to be there, remember, top activities. So you need to analyze the text to understand what the man says. Okay, in this case, the man or the woman, sorry, the author. You need to analyze that, but then you need to evaluate as well a little bit, because you have to say which of the concepts support the ideas and which don't. Okay, so it would be there between analyze and evaluate. Understand it, simply read it and understand, but having to identify and having to explain things makes it go higher, okay? Makes the requirements go further up. If we have to explain in your own words the concepts of rotation and revolution, would be like what we said before about photosynthesis, but changing the words, so closer to understand exactly. Okay. And mentioning the 5 steps of the scientific method, also remember and understand if they change the words, but that's it. What about compare and contrast the reasons France and the UK had for entering the Second World War? What about that one? Where would you put it? What kind of activity would you say it is? Okay, evaluate, analyze, evaluate. So they need to understand what the Second World War was, okay? And they need to analyze the situation in each country. And they're comparing there, so they're evaluating again, right? Very good. So you see what I mean? You need to climb up in the pyramid. So coming back to what you asked before, will this take more time? Not really, okay? If you have this pyramid and you've got the taxonomy in front of you when you're designing the activities, then it's exactly the same thing. You don't really have to do everything. You don't have to go step by step. You may want to stay longer in one of the stages, and then you can move up to the other one. For example, I do social science. Maybe I cannot apply many things as a science teacher would be able to do, okay? And maybe a science teacher would have it more complicated to evaluate, but in my case, in history, for example, it's very easy. They have to evaluate and analyze a lot of things to come to conclusions, right? So it depends on the subject, depends on the level, depends on the year of the students, depends on many things. But remember, having the taxonomy in front of you would really, really help planning those activities and making sure that they're climbing up and they're going in a safe way, and that the pyramid doesn't collapse in the middle of the process and they crash against the wall. No, they're going to feel safer. Okay, I'm going to hurry up because I've just realized that we're very slow. Assessment, as I said before, can be something as well. We know that this right now we've got a lot of students. There's a wide variety of students. We've got diversity in the classrooms, and we need to understand that as well. So our assessment cannot be the same for everybody. Okay. I'm sure you've all seen this picture before. Okay. Does this mean that we have to give different exams to people? No, but we can assess them in a different way. We can see how far up in the pyramid each of them can go and adapt. Okay. And of course, the marks have to be adapted as well. Oh, very quickly. Okay. So what we need to do first of all is identify the minimum content and build up from there. Okay. We have to try to design activities that cover different types of learning. So for example, if I'm asking about history, I'm going to ask about dates, I'm going to ask about characteristics of the different periods, but I may as well give them a picture and say, okay, this is a picture of which period, why, what is in the picture that tells you that this represent the Paleolithic or the Neolithic or the Middle Ages, and why? Or maybe ask them, why don't you draw your own megalith and explain it, okay, and what it was used for. So incorporate different types of activities for different types of learners, and you'll see how it really helps. Okay. Then make sure that the lower order thinking skills activities match the minimum content. Okay, and that the different types of questions that we're going to do also move up with the type of cognitive demand that we're going to do. So if we want the question from before, like the UK and France, Second World War, fine, I can ask some questions in which you have to answer which of these is correct, for example, or I can ask them, evaluate. Okay, but I need to know who I'm asking it for and what I expect to get from there. Okay, here, for example, very simple, okay, simple way of adapting. We've got filling, got a text, we have options. We have the same text, but we don't have the options that we had before, because if you see, we have for GAP 1, 3 options, for GAP 2, 3 options. But now what we have is a lot of options, and we just have to match them, like put them, locate them in the right gap. Or we can simply give them the text without any options. Now, we can use that to assess students. Like we can give each student what we think they need, if we can, depending on the type of schools we work in. Or we can make sure there's a range of activities for everybody, right? The students that are more challenged intellectually will be able to at least do the lower or the thinking skills activities, and they will have to know the content anyway, the minimum content that we have just analyzed. And then there are other students that will be able to go further, and of course their marks will be different. Okay, so adapting for diversity for assessment, the Bloom taxonomy is also very helpful because it helps you see where you are and where your students are and what kind of activities you can prepare for them. Okay, so try scaffolding, okay, because it's easy when you understand the cognitive processes, because it's about organizing content and activities, and it's not so complicated to do. It's not rocket science. Because students' learning improves, and I can tell you, I've been there, I do it, and it works. Okay, it really helps. They feel safer. Okay, it's more inclusive. It helps with that differentiation that sometimes we are demanded to do, but we find so difficult because we don't have time for doing it properly. Okay. And then students will like you more because they'll see that they're better in class, that they feel safer, and that they can do more things. Okay. So, if I'm not mistaken, this is my last slide. Yes, and please, if you have any questions or if there's anything that you'd like to know, it's time's now. And by the way, thank you for being there on a Saturday morning in this situation, like the end of the world moment. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. It's been a pleasure. Good. Thank you.
So I'll just reiterate the congratulations that passing on to you, Emma. And also to thank you for the webinar, our time. Many teachers out there can see some chat box in this event. So for that. Yeah, I can see my people are just congratulating. So from I'm going to wish everybody a nice weekend, a safe weekend. I hope able to make the best of the weekend. at Pearson, we've got some more webinars coming up next Saturday, talking about video next Saturday. I can see a couple of people saying it's difficult to understand in the chat box.
Yeah, you're kind of the connection is not great.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that we've got some and we've got coming up teaching digitally. So watch this.
Yeah, I think Michael's having some problems with the connection there. But I suppose it's like I said, it's a complicated time. And I think what he was trying to say is that there's more webinars coming, and yeah, there he is. Yeah.
Okay, and I will see you in another webinar. Okay.